How's it going, guys? Welcome back to DYAD in the Force. Today, we are going to be reacting to this video by Star Force 1 called Why the Sequels Will Never Have the Same Redemption That the Prequels Had. Just based off of the title alone, I'm imagining the video is going to be wrong off of the bat. What do you think?
I mean, it's an opinion piece, right? An opinion can actually be wrong if it's based off of false or incorrect, information. Again, like everything, we're going to approach this with the best of intentions and in hopes of good faith.
All right, let's get into the video.
The first 6 films were the vision of one author, George Lucas. Lucas designed arcs that spanned decades of in-universe time and decades of real time, and he had the authority to push through ideas that were risky, eccentric, and ahead of their time. And to top all that off, it had the benefit of all coming from one singular creative mind. There was no conflicting vision, there was no alternatives. What George Lucas wanted was one cohesive vision, and because he was one mind, that's what he could do.
He's already wrong here, which I predicted. George Lucas had the vision for sure. He was the architect and the world builder, but during the original trilogy, which is universally hailed by most Star Wars fans, was a collaborative effort. George wrote A New Hope. Empire Strikes Back was drafted by Lee Brackett, and then they passed away. Then the script was finished by Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas, and then Return of the Jedi was written by Kasdan. In terms of directing, George directed A New Hope.
Yeah.
Irvin Kershner directed Empire, and Richard Marquand directed Return. And then we have the prequels, which, yes, George wrote and directed all of the prequels, but
It's relevant to point out because he's saying it like George Lucas has had one singular vision, which is objectively false. Even in and of himself, he has not had one vision.
the fact that the prequels needed a redemption and they were all written and directed by George Lucas kind of detracts from the main premise of this video. And of course, historically, Star Wars was saved in the edit by Marshall Lucas.
Each film has strengths, yet the trilogy lacks a single mind that pushed the prequels toward a defined end state. On top of that, Lucas's own story treatments were set aside, which removed the long arc.
There's some stuff here. For one thing, his big issue is the perception that he has to hold over the sequels, right? It's the way things have been propagandized supposedly against it, right? This whole idea that the sequels had no plan is objectively false, right? We know that they did have a plan, that the reason that they didn't go with the other version with the Duel of the Fates was because it strayed so far from their plan. It's literally what they said. They mentioned throwing away Lucas's treatments, and it's funny that it's put like that because we know of at least 4 different sequels treatments that Lucas was putting together. One was the microbiotic universe. One of them was Darth Talon in there. The other one is closest to what we got, which is what we have in The Last Jedi. Like there's a bunch of there's an interview with Mark Hamill from like 1982 where he talks about George calling him up and being like, "What are you doing in 2002? I have ideas for like talking about it." Everything he's saying about this is fundamentally false, but it's all built on this notion that was directly kind of propagandized and kind of detracts from his point like a lot. I mean, the only thing that would keep the sequels from at least, from dunking on this particular point is if people like him continue to proselytize against it. Because if that stops and you let people just watch the films as they are without someone saying there was no plan or anything like that, a regular human sees the obvious through line throughout the sequels of like the difference between blood and legacy. Like it's actually a very clear and solid through line.
My thoughts on that is basically like with the advent of social media, we have a lot of poisoning the well happening. And this isn't a an original take. The singularity, the sequel hate was this notion that they didn't have a plan, right? But we have IP development group meetings notes from 2014 that show all of this stuff. Like what actually happened is they didn't push aside George Lucas's treatments. They took bits and pieces that worked with their plan and then didn't use the stuff that didn't work. But in terms of like the poisoning of the well, like, yeah, just like Choco just said, like we can see the cohesion or the cohesiveness of the sequel trilogy. Albeit The Force Awakens ranks a bit middling and The Rise of Skywalker like the lowest on my ranking, I can still understand it. Your ability to understand the through line does not mean that you ultimately like the movie, right? It doesn't matter if you like or love these movies. They have a cohesive story.
Yeah, I mean, I would also just like to point out for the record here that I believe this is true of both of us, but I mean, I love the prequels. I like the prequels overall more than I like the sequels. I just really love The Last Jedi. But like, we like the prequels more. I still think this is a crazy premise because of how universally despised the prequels were. Like, that was a big touchstone in media. You would turn on a random show and then they would just be like talking about how the prequels nearly destroyed Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like that was a constant state. I don't see that. Not only do they not see that with the sequels outside of culture war issues, but I've already seen the tide turn on them. Like we see the tide turn. We see Last Jedi being met with a ton of opposition nowadays.
Because we're on the boat. You know, everyone else is screaming from the shore. And just to kind of corroborate Choco's take there is, yeah, overall, the prequels and the originals rank higher on my Star Wars list, but still I'm labeled as a sequel defender or a shill for having nuanced opinions.
Yeah, it's either constant hate or you love it.
Because authorship gives critics and fans a stable lens for reevaluation. When you visit the prequels, you're re-engaging with Lucas. You can trace how he treats institutions, how he stages wars and senates, how he plays with prophecy, romance, fate, all of these themes that he included in the prequel trilogy.
He does make a good point here that you can see how George, treats institutions, those relationships with these organizations. They haven't changed. He was saying that this is like a stable lens with which you can view it. Lucasfilm has always been a collaborative effort, and they're building this stuff with access to the vault and with all of these thoughts. Like, you have all of this groundwork that's already laid out, and everything still exists within it. Problem is, there's a lot of people who they don't know a ball. Now it's something that exists in their head. I don't know if it's arrogance or if it's entitlement, but like they're like, oh, what happened didn't match up with what I thought was going to happen. Therefore, Star Wars is wrong. I'm right. Star Wars got it wrong.
Yeah, especially with the part where you said, like, nothing has changed, except everything has changed. And I say that in agreement with your take, because if you're trying to look for the same relationships between, organizations, senates, and everything, none of that exists because we're 30 years into the future where it has been already taken down. The Empire reigned, then the Empire was taken down, and a new republic was formed. 30 years into that future, we don't know where we are. And I like to say this about the entirety of the Skywalker saga. The prequels had the advantage of knowing where it needed to go. The sequels were largely in uncharted territory. There was no episode 10 for them to be like, this is where we need to be. George and Kasdan wrote the originals, and they had this kind of like isolated narrative. And then when George started working on the prequels, he just needed a vehicle to get them from the origin to what we know of in A New Hope.
Even when a choice frustrates you, you can see the hand that made it and weigh it as part of a larger design. It also opens up speculation, theory crafting, everything.
The fact that you are unable to theory craft or speculate is a you problem. Like, I don't know what else to say here. We talk about and theory craft and speculate all of the time. Again, we've always done this throughout not only the prequels but the original trilogy. And again, the original trilogy was not one singular vision, but we can still theory craft, right? Was that really Luke's father? Was Vader lying to him? Look at the sequel trilogy itself. We're theory crafting on Kylo Ren and the nature of the Knights of Ren and what his relationship is with them, and then
was
we're theory
Snoke?
crafting about Snoke. I mean, there were
My
so many
most popular
Snoke
video
theories.
is theory crafting on Rey Kenobi.
Yeah, there was always theory crafting on like what is her lineage, which like there are so many channels, Star Wars channels that exist based off of making theories about new stories coming out. It's just a bad take. That's a horrible take.
But with the sequel trilogy, when you know there's no plan, there's no point speculating because you know they're just making stuff up.
That's called stories. That's how story.
Well,
I'm just fucking
making
that's
stuff
how
up as they go.
everything
Yeah.
is written.
but I hate this talking point because we have meeting notes from the Art of Rise of Skywalker, and they reveal just how much they had planned out. Like JJ was sending dailies to Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson was sending dailies to JJ, and we have notes from 2014 with George Lucas in attendance for some of those meetings, approving some of the concept art. And they were talking about Rey's fate and how they wanted her to be the Skywalker of their trilogy, right? And so, I don't know. Like, I know that there is perception, but then there's also the reality of it all. Whether you like the plan or not, there was a plan.
That's always the funniest thing to me. The people behind the scenes will specifically say the plan changed, and they're like, "See, there was no plan," and you're like, "They just said there was a plan." That's literally what it means. Obviously, plans did have to change specifically for Rise of Skywalker. We have notes from 2014 for this that let us know that Episode 9 was going to largely be Leia's movie. They were planning this whole thing out, and Carrie Fisher passed away. That was the biggest weakness. Remember, we're not Rise of Skywalker fans. That's my least favorite Star Wars film. I just don't like this era where we have to lie or feign not knowing the truth or like be ignorant of stuff that happened. I think it's a strange point.
Second, the Clone Wars effect does not exist for the sequel era. The Clone Wars did the work. It took the space between films and filled it with character, politics, tragedy, and heroism. The series overlapped directly with the films and walked step for step towards Order 66. It's also a gift to later audiences who can now consume the prequels as part of a fuller tapestry. Yes, Star Wars Resistance exists and it has its charms, but it ran for 2 seasons and aimed at a way younger audience. It never attempted the political depth or tragic layering that the Clone Wars delivered. How did the New Republic falter? Why did the First Order rise in the shadows? What was Luke's new Jedi project beyond a handful of flashbacks? Who were the citizens who felt the cost of Starkiller Base? And how did that disaster reshape the galaxy's economy? Answers were given to none of that.
I don't think you can hold it against the sequels for not having a Clone Wars, because quite frankly, it could very well still get its own Clone Wars, but I would argue, does it really need one? By that I mean, we have like information suggesting that they're gearing up for like a Luke Skywalker series, but we also have the Mandalorian, we also have the Bad Batch, we have a lot of like small little projects pointing at and hinting at like certain narrative setups. But all of the questions that you just asked for are answered in Aftermath, Bloodline, Shadows of the Sith, as well as the Mandalorian and Ahsoka, if you know where to look.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because he says that, you know, now it can be watched in retrospect as this great tapestry. Again, it's just kind of interesting because the Clone Wars didn't start until 2008. Phantom Menace was in 1999. So, and by the way, the Clone Wars started with the film, which wasn't great. But that there is a decade. That being said, we are already getting like those questions answered. Not only have they already been answered in books and stuff, and like we've been able to answer most of these since 2016. Talk about a tapestry. Like it's already there. But we're also getting that in other media too. Like there's a bunch of media that's also directly shown in Resistance. He mentioned Resistance here, but like that's the big part of it. What was Luke's new Jedi project? It was a Jedi school. We've seen it. We've seen it in The Mandalorian. We saw it in Book of Boba Fett. And again, there's comics on it. Who were the citizens that felt? I mean, that's shown us in Resistance, right? Yeah, Kaz He's worried about his parents, and then we meet some of the people that we literally see die in Leia Bloodlines. Did that reshape the galaxy's economy? We find more about that in Resistance Reborn from Rebecca Roundhorse, as well as Spark of the Resistance by Justina Ireland. It's all there. You're talking about it being viewed as a tapestry in hindsight. So things that are repairing certain issues, like a big one being, why did the clones all turn on the Jedi, right? The whole chip, that's new. That was from the Clone Wars. That didn't exist anywhere else. And now we just accept that in hindsight. The main problem here is some people are absolutely refusing to accept new information in hindsight. So for those people, yeah, nothing's going to change because they don't want it to change. They like to hate it.
And I think that a lot of it stems from a, like you just said, an unwillingness to engage with the content. This video says a lot about the Clone Wars equivalent not existing for the sequels, a lot of answers not being there, but we have all of the answers there. You just need to be willing to go look for the answers. Just like with the sequels not having its own Clone Wars, it has more. It has Mandalorian, it has Ahsoka, it has Bad Batch, it has Resistance, it has a lot of books for you to read. And all it takes is a willingness to engage with that media.
And here's the thing that I feel like we aren't truly accepting here. Is yes, there has been a resurgence of the prequel trilogy era. There's not a lot of people, at least that I'm aware of, that truly changed their mind about them. There's a lot of people who hated them before, and they hate them now. Yeah. I see and I talk to them on a regular basis, right? There's just other people that like them now. There are just more voices now. And I feel like these people are assuming that they think that something new is going to come out that's going to make them like the sequels. That's not what the resurgence is. That's not what the revision on it is.
For many, Revenge of the Sith is the artistic peak of the prequel project.
I would disagree now. Having watched Revenge of the Sith in theaters again recently, nostalgia does a lot of heavy lifting. The Battle of Heroes draws out way too long, and it just reinforced how much they sidelined Padme. Like, she went from strong leader to hopeless doting wife who could do nothing but cry and long for Anakin.
Like, hey, she could sit in the room and be pregnant. She was great at that.
That's not a character that was established by George. And George did a whole 180. And nobody changes their principles because they're pregnant. That might change their capability to act. She was just sidelined completely. Kind of ruined her character. But I digress. I just wanted to say, I disagree. Revenge of the Sith has kind of lowered on my rankings. It's not like super, super low. But it's definitely not peak. Or it's not the pinnacle anymore for me. The only thing that stays pinnacle throughout all this is actually, at least for me, Empire Strikes Back. No matter how much I love The Last Jedi, it always kind of fluctuates between the two.
One thing I did want to talk about is, I've been working in this new job, and this has me talking to a lot of different people from all different age groups, different backgrounds, different cultures, different everything. And one of the things I always do is I always try to wear something on me that's Star Wars. Something subtle, you know what I mean? Like a tie clip that is an Imperial insignia, or just like something subtle. And so I end up in a lot of Star Wars like conversations, and It's amazing once you get out in the world and you're not in the chronically online bubble, and you realize that the prequel Resurgence is an online phenomenon. And something that hasn't been mentioned here at all is the prequel trilogy was carried by memes. Memes did more for them than anything else. And we just happened to be in the rise of meme culture, and it became such a massive like touchstone. I don't know. I think that is worth saying, because I am talking to people on a regular basis, and I've actually found that a lot of the, especially older people, like the new stuff a lot more than they like the prequels. And I honestly, I don't blame them. I like the prequels more, but I do think all the newer stuff has been better made films.
Well, we have, our community is host to a plethora of different opinions. Some love the sequels, some love the prequels, some love the originals the most. But I think the truth that comes out of that is we can never know. You know, you would think as creators in the bubble that we are in, we're subject to a lot of sequel hate. But if you can at least acknowledge that there are some people that love the sequels, that much is true.
You're never going to get them to admit that, though. So someone will comment on a video and say everyone hates these movies, and that one comment will be surrounded by hundreds of people who will enjoy it. There'll be people responding to it, and those people will still not accept that because the mental gymnastics, right? They have to say, oh, well, fans don't like it. And they're like, no, we like it and we're fans. No, if you like it, then you're not a fan. And that's how it's just a weird thing.
My favorite comment in that vein is nobody cares. And I'm like, you are here.
Why are you here?
The Rise of Skywalker, on the other hand, tries to reconcile both of those tones while tying up every loose end, and many viewers can feel the strain. The pacing is incredibly fast.
I can agree to a certain extent about The Rise of Skywalker. As we've been saying, it ranked slowest in my list of movies. There were a lot of ideas in the movie that did have potential. They were just poorly executed.
Just to add to that really quickly, he mentioned that like the Rise of Skywalker was like a checklist that was, you know, filling out items, and it's funny that you would say that because that's what Revenge of the Sith was. It was check boxes that you needed to check in order to bridge the gap to A New Hope. So I think that's just kind of funny in and of itself. This is kind of a side point because it doesn't really help or hurt the argument, but I feel like he made it sound like the pacing was fast in order to fix things. And, you know, I'm always saying they should have just gone to one less planet. You know, they chose to make it that fast. They didn't have to do that. But the cohesiveness of the previous one, again, it's because it is meant to butt up against another film.
Yeah, I think that's one of my chief criticisms of the sequel trilogy. And the reason why The Last Jedi is one of my favorite is because, for the most part, in The Rise of Skywalker, there's not much time for you to sit in a moment. In The Last Jedi, like, we're literally kind of sitting there pontificating through several scenes in silence.
Revenge of the Sith ended the trilogy on a very high note. Rise of Skywalker ended it on a very low note. But that is the vibe that has been left with fans to sit in and stew in for all this time. Prequel fans were left to stew on the best part, while the sequel fans were left to stew on the worst.
I don't know about that. I'm left stewing on the best. The Last Jedi. Revenge of the Sith has actually moved down on my list, like we said, having watched it recently, challenging my nostalgia glasses for the film. But I feel like the majority of this video is a justification for this creator to, like we say, not engage with the content, like genuinely.
Listen, if you're watching this video, I want you to make a guess right now. Okay, it's gonna be a little game. Don't cheat. Actually, put it in the chat. Where do you think Rise of Skywalker currently sits on Rotten Tomatoes? What number? What number do you have in your head? Put it in the comments right now. Don't check. Just put it in the comments. You ready? All right. This is what it's at.
The fourth reason is the supportive content volume and quality. By this, I mean the prequels did not stand alone. They were backed by a tidal wave of books, comics, magazines, everything you can think of, RPG games, many of which became beloved on their own merits. Publishers carried arcs that stretched for years, and a generation of readers built their Star Wars identity inside of pages instead of on the screen.
Well, I mean, that's because there was about a 20-year gap from Return to Phantom. That's a lot of time for there to be publishing and stories to build up. Like with Revenge, there was another 7 years until Lucasfilm was sold, and another 3 years until The Force Awakens came out. So that's a total history of about 27 years. Meanwhile, The Rise of Skywalker released in 2019. The sequel trilogy has only had 5 years of post hoc opportunity. Since then, we've had a plethora of shows, series, exploring different stories. But now, We're just around the corner from the first movie, Mandalorian and Grogu. Ryan Gosling's Starfighter, Daisy Ridley's New Jedi Order. Suffice to say, we're kind of being a bit premature in spelling doom for an era that is, for all intents and purposes, still relatively young in comparison.
And I mean, talking about how much supportive content, with comics and books that are there, I mean, that I would have to push back. I feel like the vast majority of the content, especially the content that had really long narratives and had a lot of depth, most of that was the post Return of the Jedi stuff. I mean, I'm a massive fan of the expanded universe, and the prequel content side of it is actually relatively small comparatively, and then if we're looking at post Return of the Jedi, or even just original trilogy era forward. If you can jump further to the Legacy era, you can look at the Old Republic. I feel like the prequels had the least amount of extended content. He showed a bunch of the Karen Travis books, which of course didn't even get to finish because George Lucas took a big dump in the middle of their story. I don't know. There's not a whole ton of long running narrative in that space. If you're looking at publishing as a whole, we have a ton of stuff now. I mean, especially if we're looking in the comic realm, and the stuff that yes, there's going to be less stuff that is actually in the sequel trilogy. And of course, that's mostly because they were waiting to see what content they were going to be making, right? And they've just now, literally this year, opened up that era to create content in. And they've already announced that's where the next Star Wars line is going. We're getting a bunch of, Kylo Ren stuff in there. We're getting a new Finn book that's about to drop. We're getting a new Rey book that's coming out soon. Where like there's so much stuff. Plus, if you wrap in this whole Filoni verse, which is all the stuff that's leading up to the sequel trilogy, not to mention what we already have. I have trouble saying which one there's more of. Like he mentions that there is the Road to books, and there was a few of those, yeah. But that's not even the half of it. That's a drop of the bucket of what we have.
I also think that it's important to note that every single thing that has been published, albeit for a few exceptions, is canon. What we witnessed with Legends and EU, that was Lucasfilm licensing out to several authors who were just writing their own stories. Yes, the stories were approved by George, but they didn't enter his canon until it was depicted on screen. So they largely just kind of divided and conquered. Some authors stayed in the post-return era, and some authors went into the prequels. And then of course the games, and some authors went all the way back to the Old Republic. But in this case, a publishing initiative where everything is canon or extended canon means that there's a lot more scrutiny involved when it comes to choosing the stories they tell and making sure those stories fall in line with continuity.
I'm laughing because the point you're making is fantastic. Like, one of the reasons there will be less content coming out is because there's now a unifying voice in all of this extended stuff when that was never in existence before, and that was the argument used against it in the past. It's just funny to me.
Alphabet Squadron is a gem with dogfights and trauma rendered in sharp prose, and it intersects with the companion comic in a way that actually enriches both formats. Shadow of the Sith is also pretty good because it tries to repair a missing puzzle piece.
I just want to point out here that he said that Shadows of the Sith repairs a missing puzzle piece. What the hell does that mean?
I don't know. Shadow of the Sith takes place during a time period that is not part of any pending puzzle. It doesn't fit neatly into the sequels at all.
Unless I'm all for it mixing metaphors. That was just a bad one. I'm sorry.
I think what he means to say is it provided some context to a time period that we don't know any information on, but it certainly doesn't.
But that's 100% of everyone's complaint. Repairing a missing puzzle piece is just a really bad phrase. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, nothing is being repaired, and there's no puzzle pieces missing with which it needs to repair. So 733.
Bend opinion over time. The prequels benefited from hundreds of novels, young reader books, and short stories before you even get to the mountains of comics, and the sequels simply just have a sliver of that. Not enough. Hundreds of novels, young reader books, and short stories before you even get to the mountains of comics, and the sequels simply just have a sliver of that. Not enough.
You're comparing, like I said, you're comparing 27 years of development versus a total of 10 years starting from The Force Awakens and 5 years from The Rise of Skywalker.
And you'll notice that he even you even saw the Thrawn trilogy in there. That's not prequel content. Again, the vast majority of all of this volume and depth isn't prequel related.
And some of them, the Bad Batch, don't even relate to the sequel trilogy. Unless you want to talk about the very small connections through Palpatine's cloning on Mount Tantus. Now, none of this means that the sequels are doomed to be forgotten forever.
Which brings me to why in the hell is this video titled, Why the Sequels Will Never? You just said none of this means that the sequels are doomed to be forgotten forever.
He also said a very small connection through cloning on Mount Tantus.
It's a pretty big connection.
That was like a very, very large connection, and that was like most of the season.
That's also
like
if we
had
think about
2 seasons of the Bad Batch making connection.
If you think about people's complaints with somehow Palpatine returned, you think that having that connection would be a pretty large reveal.
There's just one other phrase he said that I do take some umbrage with. He says that a similar redemption would require similar tools or something like that. And I'm like, why do you believe there's only one path to redemption?
I also feel like this is jumping prematurely to a conclusion that has yet to be gamed out by time. Like, I'm not sure if the sequels will ever get their Clone Wars. And like I said earlier, I'm not quite sure it needs one. Again, we're just 5 years out from the last movie. And we had a lot of TV shows and series. So I feel like this is a case of my favorite fallacy, reductio ad absurdum.
It would take novels that are not just tie-ins but tentpoles, the kind that pick up the mysteries left hanging and resolve them in ways that feel inevitable in hindsight. In other words, it would take design, patience, and courage to let the sequel era be about itself, rather than cleaning up or revisiting older myths.
Yeah, that sentence doesn't make sense, because we're still trying, we're still in the middle of testing out the time and patience portion of that sentence. Also, it's part of a saga. While from a filmmaking perspective, they do stand on their own, the sequel trilogy. But it would be a disservice to storytelling in general for a trilogy that is a part of a saga to just not have any connection to older myths. This is why The Last Jedi is one of my favorites, because Luke is addressing the older myth. He's addressing the timeline prior. He's addressing the rise and fall of the Empire, the creation of Darth Vader, and the rise of Darth Sidious.
And the fact that it does refer to old myths is what makes it a unifying voice throughout all of the trilogies. Like, that's kind of an important thing to happen. But I do want to go back to the sentence that you said didn't make any sense, because I do think it's fascinating, because he says thinks that there would need to be material that bridges these gaps in a way that makes the conclusion feel inevitable, right? Again, this has more to do with certain people's willingness to accept things that should be considered obvious. Somehow Palpatine returned. Oh, you mean the Sith Lord, who literally every Sith Lord is obsessed with continuing their lifespan, and essence transfer isn't a new thing, and he has cloning technology, and he has all the Sith alchemy, and he did this in the expanded universe already. Like, there's so much evidence that should make that conclusion inevitable. We had the Vader 2020, where we saw that the Eternal Fleet was already being created, that Exegol was already a thing. And if you think about it from like a reasonable standard, Palpatine wanted to remake the galaxy in his image, in the image of the Sith. He wanted the return of the Sith Empire, the empire that came out of the husk the corrupted husk of the Republic isn't that. It makes sense that he would want only his most loyal subjects to become part of a new Sith empire. If you look at Return of the Jedi, this is like his end game. To me, it just feels, the conclusion feels that we've come to feels inevitable based off of the information that we have. And then just one last thing is he says he wants to let the sequels be about themselves, right? It'll take, what does he say, time, patience, and courage. Yes, that it'll take that from Lucasfilm, but also from you need to let the sequels be about themselves. But because, like, again, there is a very clear story that is being told about the effects of the previous war, about, you know, we had the rise of fascism and then taking it down, but how that pendulum swings, and if you're not careful, that fascism can rise again. Anti-fascist, but that's a whole separate talking point. The rise of the First Order, to me, feels inevitable because that's literally history. It's not even history. It's the present. God damn it. Yes, we have to let the sequels be about themselves, but that would require that it no longer remain a touchstone in this fake culture war, right? Because that is truly, in my opinion, the only thing that holds back acceptance. The tribalism has become so strong that they stand on principle against it and are unwilling to even reason out things that are very clearly explained in these films. I think that is the biggest hurdle. That's the biggest thing that remains to be seen.
The only thing that I'll add to that was what I was saying as I kind of inserted myself or interjected. It's beat for beat, note for note. The only thing that changed was Luke for Rey. Like, Palpatine comes back with a bunch of clones. Yep. He offers Luke an entire fleet of world devastators. Change out Luke for Rey, and he offers Kylo and Rey a fleet of, you know, planet-killing Star Destroyers. It's the same thing, but people complain about the one. And I would argue that the former, offering Luke a fleet of world devastators, was more terrible. Anyways,
it was definitely better in the film.
The main reason why I think the sequels will enjoy their day in the sun is because times have changed. And Choco alluded to this earlier in the video, which is why we're debunking this title, why the sequels will never have the same redemption that the prequels had. The arena in which the prequels clawed its way back to relevancy with the prequel fans growing up and voicing their opinion has changed. The sequels doesn't need the Clone Wars as much as the prequels did. Though I will always welcome more vertical with this era, you know. The sequels has Galaxy's Edge, you know, more prevalent mindshare, the proliferation of geek culture becoming the norm. It's cool to like Dungeons and Dragons now. You know, back in the early 2000s, it was considered the devil's work to play D&D.
Yeah, now they do that like in like movie theaters. You buy tickets. You know what I mean?
Exactly. They have live concerts. Like I was saying, geek culture has become cool culture. People line up to see comic book movies. It's no longer the dominion of hardcore fans. Like, yes, the sequel fans will grow up and will make their voices loud, especially in the age of social media. But if you've ever been to Galaxy's Edge and seen the amount of little kids running around hugging Rey and Chewie and marveling at Kylo Ren, enjoying the contemporary Star Wars universe to them, you'll know that it will eventually burgeon into the limelight once again. And the one thing that fans have nowadays that they didn't have back then, more Star Wars to come. Because we have more Star Wars than we ever had, even under the 27-year reign of George Lucas. Extended canon is just a couple of years away from eclipsing the vast catalog of Legends Expanded Universe. Time will continue, and Lucasfilm, with all of the money Disney has, will continue to produce Star Wars content. The only ones left trying to hate the sequel trilogy after more than 10 years are the ones who can't exist without hating them. the people who had nothing to do but hate them because it's their lifeblood, it's their personality. Do I think the sequels will have the same resurgence as the prequels? No. Do I think the sequels will have a resurgence? Yes. Because we'll have moved on to new stories. New Jedi Order, Starfighter, Mandalorian and Grogu, Taika Waititi's movie, Rian Johnson's trilogy. Whatever awaits us in the future, we will have it and we will meet it. So just to kind of repeat myself, it doesn't need the same redemption the prequels had, but it certainly will have a redemption.
So in that case, he's right. It's not going to have the same resurgence as the prequels, because the prequels, listen, I love the creative direction from them. I love the lore. I love the extended storytelling. I love the Jedi-ness of it. I love the politics of it. They were worse movies. they were worse. They had a harder time with critical reception. It was very, very common, their hate. Yeah, they won't have the same resurgence because they don't need to. And as soon as people move on from the hate content, I mean, as long as the hate content is driving certain people's bank accounts, they're gonna keep making it. But I think at some time people get tired of it. That's the thing that's gonna lose its steam.
And I think it is losing its steam. Because quite frankly, I think for once, people are kind of tired of talking about Brie Larson. But that'll do it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked this video and if you learned something new. And if you hated this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget to check us out live on Fridays, 5 p.m. Pacific. Choco, what did we learn today?
We learned that the sequels won't get accepted by those whose entire lives are consumed with hating it. I would think we already knew that, but but we learned it too.
And as Qui-Gon Jinn says, I believe it was a Sith Lord. Anyways, may the Force be with you. We'll see you guys next time.